Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 2nd of July. Just before we go on to our formal business this evening, I intend to go through some housekeeping matters. This meeting is being streamed live via YouTube and recorded, and the recording of this meeting will be uploaded to YouTube within 2 working days, where it can be accessed by everyone. Members, please use the microphones in front of you when talking to ensure that you turn your microphone on and off once you've finished speaking, as another member or officer will not be able to speak if your microphone is still on. Please note that the Council's visual equipment may, on some occasions, focus on or near the public gallery, and therefore those in attendance may be filmed or recorded. Attendance at this meeting signifies your agreement to this, and if, as a member of the public, you do not want to be filmed or recorded, please inform a Council staff member in attendance, and we will try to assist where reasonably possible. On hearing the fire alarm, we will ask all attendees to immediately evacuate the building. Please evacuate via the nearest fire exits and make your way down to Community Square outside the main reception doors. That then takes us on to item 2 of tonight's agenda, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, please, Chloe?
Thank you, Chair. We've received an apology from Councillor Elliott and Councillor Larkins, with Councillor Aaron Elliott and Councillor Milner as substitute.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both for substituting tonight. That takes us then on to item 3, which is to sign the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we all happy and content that they're accurate? Yeah. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to item 4, which is to declare any interest which members may have on the items contained on this agenda. When declaring an interest, a member must state what that interest is. Do we have any interest this evening, please? That's none. Thank you very much. And that's to take us then on to item 5, which is to consider whether any items in Part A will be considered in private or any of the items in Part B in public. I don't intend to make any recommendations to change that or the order of the agenda paper that we have in front of us tonight. That then takes us on to item number 6, which is the Corporate Performance Report Q4 2025 to 2026. But just before handing over to Jamie to introduce this item, I'd like to say that this is part of the or an outcome of the LGA peer review that we've just had to strengthen the role that this committee plays in scrutinising the overall performance of the council. I think it's highly welcomed that we now have this role, and I hope going to be very useful having these reports before us on a regular basis, so that we have standing items that this committee can play an active role in supporting the aspirations of the corporate plan and causing accountability where it's needed. The other point that I just want to make on this as well, just so members are aware, these reports will no longer be going to individual cabinet committees, so it really is an important role that we're now playing as an overall scrutiny committee, that I do want this to be a full and active debate moving forward, so that we can give these papers the due consideration that they're worth in keeping the council fully on track. I'll take a point, but I'm keen not to have an overall debate on this because it's outside of the actual agenda. But Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Jordan. I don't want a protracted discussion here either on this, but I'm a little bit behind the curve here because I didn't really realise that these performance indicators and measures are coming forward for the committee this evening, the Overview Scrutiny Committee. I am aware that some councils don't have a separate Finance and Audit Committee, but I'm a little bit confused as to where things actually go. The performance measures and indicators traditionally came along to the Performance and Administration Committee. Then they went to their respective committees. We're dealing here with a number of financial issues that traditionally go to the Finance and Audit Committees. So I'm a little bit confused as to who does what, to be honest, and whether the P&A Committee is actually defunct now.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. What I'll do, if that's okay, Chloe, I'm going to take that as a point of information because we are without, we're not within scope of the agenda. And if you're satisfied with that, Councillor Hills, in answer to your question, this has all come about as a way to strengthen the committee system, but particularly to give overview and scrutiny a more active role. And actually looking back reflectively on how some of these reports have been packed into either individual committees or other statutory committees of this council, the general thought behind this is that scrutiny, due to the fact that we don't have reports other than call-ins coming forward on a regular basis, this gives us more time as members to deep dive into the facts and figures to check the overall performance of the council is on track in line with the aims of the corporate plan. I think you raise a very valid point because this has been featured in cabinet reports as part of the LGA peer review feedback that we received, which is what these changes are based on. But I think your overall point about needing to communicate that to members and actually some justification as to why this was recommended, but actually more importantly, how this now sits in relation to other committees is important. And what I'll do is I'll work with the management team and the committee section to get an email out to all members of the council explaining these changes and the new roles of the various committees. Unless, Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add? Yes.
General Fund provisional outturn report as an example. That I came to the cabinet meeting, it was discussed there, and it's being discussed this evening. Does it also get discussed at F&A? No.
Yes, thank you. Just on the point about F&A, I think it was felt that the volume of papers, particularly around the budget reporting periods and the actual budget setting process, the volume was so significant that due to the fact that there was a void in what could and couldn't be called in as part of the regular scrutiny call-ins, that we had more capacity as a committee to spend more time on these very important papers in terms of making sure there's good governance in place organisationally. So, okay, is that? Yeah, I'm going to take this as well as a point of clarity or information, if that's okay. So,
yes, it's a point of clarity. Apologies. I didn't quite understand when I saw these reports. I just assumed they would go to committees. Therefore, I probably haven't spent as much time looking at them as I would have done in normal circumstances. So your clarification is very useful. And I actually think it's probably useful for it to come here for us to investigate as an overview scrutiny. So I can understand why it's happened, but in all fairness, probably it's jumping onto us now. So some of us will not have had a chance to look at it in detail.
thank you. I think that's a very valid point. And what we can do is we can go fairly slowly through the agenda tonight so that members can intervene if they wish to. I think the other point to make clear, and I'm sorry, Councillor Hills, I didn't answer this when you mentioned it. You're quite right. These reports do go to Cabinet, but under the way that we are structured in terms of governance, I was unable to then call them in if members had contention or wanted further clarity over a certain point. Because no decisions are actually made on these at cabinets because they're standing update reports, we had no ability under the Constitution to then call the items into this committee. So I think it's perfectly valid that they still go to cabinet and very important that they still go to cabinet. But actually, I think it will improve the overall governance of our organisation to have them here as well for wider member input. So if everyone's content on that point, and like I said, I'll work with the management team and committee section to make sure that we get a note circulated to all members, because every member of this council sits on a various committee, and I think they might be equally as shocked to turn up to one of our cabinet committees wondering where their PIs have gone. So it's a very valid point, and thank you to Councillor Hills and Croxton for raising that. So without further ado, we'll turn to item 6, and I'll ask Jamie, please, to introduce and take us through the quarterly performance report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't planning to go page by page, but Yeah, so very happy to take questions and cover areas in more detail. All I was going to pull out was a couple of key indicators that you may have picked up on already that are either positive or areas of concern. The first one I wanted to mention was around the volume of complaints and customer inquiries we're dealing with at the moment. I think it's clear that the customer services team in my directorate are under some pressure due to the volume of calls and in particular the complexity of the calls. So we're finding each call is taking a lot longer to deal with, and certainly the volume's gone up, and you'll see that the number of abandoned calls has gone up significantly, even if the wait time hasn't in particular. You'll also note that the number of complaints have jumped up quite a bit. There has been a change in methodology around housing complaints. So the guidance that we've received from the regulator is that we should be registering a lot more inquiries as complaints. So some things that we may have previously categorised as a service request are now captured as complaints. You'll see that that would contribute to that jump up. But we are seeing a greater number of public complaints. I think the use of AI is making that easier for members of the public. So through using AI, people are able to articulate their concerns or their complaints. And I think that's a positive thing for members of the public to be able to have that as a tool. But it does put extra pressure on councils, and that's something that's been seen across the country. Moving on to, yes, certainly.
Yep.
I'm just coming in because as we're going through, it's worth noting, could you clarify what is the difference between a stage 1 and stage 2 complaint?
Mhm.
And it is slightly alarming that the volume of complaints under PI 59 seem to be significantly greater, and I'm not quite sure I understand how AI may have contributed to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the AI point, what we're finding is we're seeing a lot more complaints that have been submitted using AI to assist a resident to put their case together. And so what we will find is when complaints are raised, they're more lengthy, they're more complicated. They refer back to issues such as safeguarding on a more regular basis, where that may not be relevant. And what we're finding is that when we reply at stage 1, and I'll explain the process in a moment, but when we reply at stage 1, we're often getting pretty much the same complaint back at stage 2. And that's absolutely a citizen's right to resubmit that complaint, but it's not necessarily raising further points, which we would normally expect. But if I can just explain how that process works. So this is based on advice from the Ombudsman in terms of how the process should run. What we do is we have an initial stage. So a complaint comes in, it may be triaged by the customer services team or sent directly in as a complaint using the website, and that is dealt with by the relevant service manager. And signed off probably by the head of service or assistant director. As a director, I don't get involved in that, and that complaint will be responded to. It may be that the complaint is upheld or not upheld. It may be that there's a decision to provide some compensation, and that could be, it's often in the region of £100 or £200, depending on the complaint, and that's all based on advice from the Ombudsman. If at that stage the complainant isn't happy with the response, they have the right to escalate that to stage 2. And what that means is that the complaint will be dealt with by a director, normally the director responsible for that service. And so, for example, in my world, I would look at all of the evidence, I'd look at the stage 1 complaint and the response to that. I'd make inquiries with the relevant team, and then I would form a judgment on whether that stage 1 response was considered the right one. And so I could overturn the decision at stage 1, or I could offer further compensatory payment, and that's the stage 2 process. When that stage 2 process is completed, that's their opportunity then. If they are still unhappy, they can raise it with the Ombudsman. But the Ombudsman will not accept somebody coming to them directly if it hasn't been through those 2 stages.
That's one point of clarification. I'm just wondering about these complaints. I have received a complaint today in my capacity of a councillor or chair of planning. As far as I just forwarded it on, should the process have gone through a more rigorous bureaucratic process, or will the complaint I just forwarded on to, I assume it went to Chief Executive, will it feature as a complaint, or is it just those that have phoned in and reported to?
Yep. No, absolutely. So if it filters in through a member and we consider it a complaint, then it would go through the formal process, be registered as a stage 1 complaint.
Thank you.
Councillor Hills. Sorry, microphone, please.
Just going to ask if it would be helpful if you could tell us which page you're referring to, please.
Or which PI? Might be easier.
17.
17. Okay, thank you.
Haven't of that particular report.
Councillor Hills, could you turn your microphone off unless you're coming back? Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions from members at this stage, or happy to proceed through the report? Yeah, thank you.
One area that I wanted to just flag, and it's quite minor, but I think it's important to note, and you'll have to forgive me while I work through my pages as well, but looking at household waste and recycling under the, let's go further through, bear with me one moment. So under the operational services section, which is way further in the pack, here we go, sorry. So apologies, it's page 38, where you'll see PI 6 and PI 7. So the first one is household waste recycling. You will see it's a percentage point increase, but we are seeing a positive trend in recycling, which has been a really tough thing to push over a long period of time. So we are seeing improvements in that, and likewise with residual waste, a gentle but notable drop there in the last quarter and over the financial year. So I think it's worth noting that we are making progress. I think simpler recycling reforms have helped support that, and obviously the introduction of food waste is further helping to reduce that residual waste amount.
Pause there, please. On the recycling rates, do we believe that there is correlation between the introduction and simplification of glass recycling that's helped push those figures up? And then I'll come to Councillor Milner after.
Yes. That one, the food recycling, I was so pleased that we introduced it into recycling in flats. Over the years, we've had recycling in flats, but the last little piece of the jigsaw is the food waste, and it's absolutely marvellous. I'm now actually looking more into the recycling of the ones that you can put in larger supermarkets. I didn't realise how much went into an ordinary sack and went to landfill, right down to the wrappings that you get your biscuits in. It's got on there recycling, and I'll obviously do that. So I've got recycling everywhere in my kitchen now, but it's absolutely marvellous to see that we are recycling the food in flats. It really is, and it's well used. You know, where I live at St Andrew's Court, it's well used. Thank you very much.
That's great to hear, Councillor Milner, and absolutely, I think we're ahead of the game compared to some of our neighbours and other boroughs to be implementing these changes. And likewise, absolutely agree in terms of glass recycling, being able to do it simply and be able to do it is making a huge difference for us, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Milner.
And just on a slightly, probably a different note, in all the heat that we had in the last week, that I have emailed in to the Waste Management, Stuart Alford and Stuart Bobby, to thank all of our workforce, that they was going out earlier in the morning, picking up the rubbish before it got really hot, emptying the bins. And I did speak to one of the operatives, the street cleansing team, and he actually fainted in the heat. And I said, and he said, yeah, and he was only off work 2 days. And he was back at work, and I thought that needs a recommendation, even here, or, you know, as I emailed in to say thank you to him because of the work that they all do. And indeed, in the offices as well, the heat that, you know, people had to put up with, you know, in our count inside and outside. And I think it needs a good big thank you, I think, from all councillors here today, and all of them as well in the council. Do you want me to shut up now?
And thank you, Councillor Milner. I'm really pleased that you mentioned that, because I too have written in to pass on thanks. I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes of just how much manual labour is involved and what even a few degrees of temperature increase does to that work. And I am sorry to hear about the person who fainted, etc., because it just goes to show how hard it is to work in these conditions. As an addition to that, I would also like to thank the members of the public, because I've been out as well checking on our operatives around the borough in these hot conditions. And one thing that really struck me in some of those conversations is just how touched they've been by the concern that's been shown to them by the general public, the fact that people have been waking up as early to take them out ice cold water. And I think it really does show what a good community we've got here in Gravesham, that we're able to look out for each other. On a more general theme, not directly related to performance indicators, one thing that I've noticed in this heat is that the elderly within my community, and I've had several calls on this, have been struggling to get their bins out, etc. So I think we need to look perhaps at what support's available to the elderly in these extreme conditions, and to whether we can make exceptions in extreme heat conditions about looking down our vulnerability list and perhaps giving them a call saying, maybe leave your bags by the front door and our operatives can come up and give you a bit of assistance. Because when you're in your 90s and you're struggling with not having slept the night before and the heat already being around 26 degrees by 7 o'clock in the morning, doing your steps, again, we don't want to see people fainting. In addition to that, I'd like it fed back to see if there's any opportunity that we can look at of perhaps introducing a bin cleanliness service for the elderly community as well, something that could potentially be chargeable and generate some additional revenue for this council. But I have had some concerns as well from one lady who phoned me, said that she was so embarrassed by the smell coming from her bin, she wasn't going to put out her rubbish that week. And again, somebody elderly, that I think we need to look at the impact that these extreme weather conditions are having on those who are vulnerable. I did go around and clean her bin, just for the record, but I think there needs to be a point of call, because she had contacted me saying that she had looked and there were several bin cleaning services available privately, but she didn't know who to trust. She didn't want people coming into her home, etc. And I think there's a lot that we can do in that space. So just if we could informally feed that back through the system, that'd be great. Councillor Milner.
Sorry, I did forget, and it was remiss of me to forget about our street champions. Street champions, they do it voluntary, and they was out in the heat and going out a little bit earlier in the morning. And I've seen street champions out in all that heat in the afternoon as well. Yeah, so again, you know, I think that we owe them a big thank you as well.
Yes, absolutely agree. And we do have some stats in there around the number of street champions we have. And I think that's edging towards 900 now. So that's a fantastic display of support from our community. Shall I move on? So the last area I wanted to flag, but as I say, I'm very happy to talk in more detail about any of the sections or take any questions. But the last one I wanted to mention was on page 53. That's under the housing portfolio. And I'm looking at PI 32 in particular. So that's the total households prevented or relieved of homelessness. And you'll see that figure now has gone up to 64. I think we're doing some really, really innovative work as a council to look at how we can prevent people from moving into TA, make sure if they are in TA that's temporary accommodation, I should say, that's as short as possible. We've been using calling on our own stock, but we've also been having forming partnerships with other organisations. And we have one that's going to be coming online shortly, a partnership with a local almshouses charity, which we'll be familiar with, Pinnock's, where we will be having nomination rights for 27 units at their new development at the old Customs House. So not only are we seeing a fantastic historic asset within the borough being brought back into use, but that's going to provide 27 homes for people who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness, and they all will be available at housing, local housing allowance rates, so we won't need to subsidise those rents either.
Thank you. Councillor Milner.
Thank you. I didn't know you was going to mention Pinnock's. I am a trustee. Okay, so I'll just declare I'm a trustee.
Sorry, we'll make that declared. So thank you very much, Councillor Milner. Just on the theme of housing, I'm really pleased to see the figures when it comes to temporary accommodation on the decrease, but also the point that you made about the wider efforts to get people out of temporary accommodation, because in terms of fiscal risks to this authority, that remains high up there and can very easily get out of hand very, very quickly. Whilst there is a lot of good work that's going on in this area, and I think it's important to note that good work has been going on despite the fact that there's been some very senior top-tier changes within that directorate, which makes it even more commendable, in my view, that we are in the position that we're in. I think, and perhaps this is something that the Housing Cabinet Committee can look at in greater detail separately, but we do need to rapidly improve how we communicate with residents who are in that situation of temporary accommodation, because I know from my own casework that a substantial number of people who are in temporary accommodation, a solution for them, and the only viable solution for them, is to guide them into private sector accommodation with benefits adjustments to meet the demand of the exceptionally high rental increases that we've seen in this area. But where they feel incredibly vulnerable is because of how many caseloads this council is dealing with, the complexity of the individual cases. When they receive a letter that bluntly says, you've now got to go into private sector accommodation, this is your only choice, you will be evicted on this date if you don't comply, etc. It's very heavy in terms of process, and I think we're missing the human element, because quite often those people who have sadly ended up in a state where they are needing temporary accommodation need a bit more care around them. And I think there's a lot of work that the Housing Committee can do, and actually some of the learning from the review that's just been done on homelessness by Lee's subcommittee that, again, I just think needs a bit more detail on. Thank you.
Yeah, I will fess up that I can't blame the housing team, because that TA has moved into my directorate following Daniel Killian's departure. And I think you pick up a really important point. I think it's the communications matter. The volume of work that team deal with in terms of TA applications is just unbelievable, really. And so they are dealing, and a huge amount of challenge. We talked before, actually, about the kind of AI responses that are adding to the number of issues that are being raised by under decisions that have been made. I think the language that we use, we're really looking at that and how we can soften that. There's a risk that we become so obsessed with making sure we can afford. We don't bankrupt the council through TA, and that we process decisions in a quick and efficient way and in line with the law, that we miss that kind of human element. And that's something the team have really been focusing on, and myself and Anita, who now oversees that area of the business, have been really keen to have a hands-on role to make sure that we're dealing with things with a human edge. And the team are fantastic, but just simply because of that level of pressure, that often it becomes a bit too much of churn, because there's just so many challenges coming in.
And sorry, just before I bring in Councillor Croxton, I want to point out that this was not a criticism of our team, because it's a huge, as you rightly said, case workload that they're dealing with very, very complicated circumstances that obviously have to be based on individuals. We also, as a local authority, are heavily bound by legislation in this area, and I think there's a bit of a public misunderstanding about what we can and can't do in some of these circumstances, and the general pressure that exists within the local housing market. And that all of those factors then means that actually, and I think we're actually bound by legislation to be blunt or appear blunt in some of those statutory decisions that this council has to make. The human element that I was talking about, I'm not asking us to deviate away because those letters are lengthy enough already. But when we send those letters, in order to inject that human element into it, we could do a friendly guide to your rights, support that's in place, other people to turn to, local counselling support, all of those things that people in those circumstances feel that there is a wider support network than you need to get out on this date if you don't comply by going to this property. Because I will talk, obviously not naming, about one situation that makes this a concern of mine. I'm supporting a number of young people in this borough who have ended up in situations of homelessness. Quite sadly, they often tend to be young women who have fled situations of domestic violence and therefore ended up in temporary accommodation, often with very young children. When they're then moved into private sector accommodation, they're coming from temporary accommodation outside of this borough where they've been placed because of how high the market costs here are in Gravesend. It's quite often our temporary accommodation stock is in places like Maidstone. If you have no disposable income and you've got young children and you can't afford a bus or a train ticket and you can't carry bags, the thought of being able to get or navigate in those circumstances from Maidstone to back to Gravesend is impossible and leaves people at their wits' end. I know that the council has pots of money that can help in discretionary circumstances, but quite often that's not explained. And that's just one feature that I was thinking we need to get better at communicating, but also around some of those external organisations that support people in crisis or indeed in situations of domestic abuse where we need to be highlighting these much more clearly to the general public. Sorry, Councillor Croxton.
Can I echo exactly what you said, and indeed what Jamie said about the work of the team and the support they do provide and the excellent support they provided to the Scrutiny Review panel. Can I also be entirely sympathetic with Jamie, because there's a huge amount of information in here and we could be picking on almost anything, and I'm going to pick on something which is page 33, which is planning enforcement actions taken. I'm trying to find out what that exactly means. It seems to be going down. I assume that is enforcement that is investigated and concluded. I'm just looking at it's page 33. Now, I every sympathy, and this is going to become a big issue of this committee, Chair, and I wonder whether, in actual fact, we should be identifying a day or so in advance the sorts of questions we would be asking, because to suddenly throw this at you is very, very difficult. And I mean, I'm saying I want, enforcement actions explained to me, but I'm not expecting you to explain that necessarily. I don't know, Chair. I'm just throwing out what is, I think, going to be a difficulty, because all of us looking around here will be saying exactly the same thing. And in all fairness, maybe we should be saying it a day or so in advance so you know what's coming.
Thank you, Councillor Croxton. I think that's an incredibly valid point, and actually it wouldn't only help from not putting a lot of pressure on the director that we happen to have at these various meetings, but also I think it will inform debate. If those questions, we would have to think about how we could realistically structure that, because planning enforcement, like you said, if it's a particular concern to several members on this committee, not only can we make sure that the director has facts and figures in front of him, if it is a particular concern on one occasion, we can then invite the actual subject leads to come before the committee, who will be able to provide much more contextual information rather than the holistic. But over to you, Jamie.
Yes, you've spotted our weakness in that this is a very wide portfolio. So we'll do what we can to answer questions today, but some we may need to take away. And I think that's a very sensible suggestion from you both, that we have some kind of pre-meet or way of feeding that in so I can come fully prepared. On your particular question around PI 22 on page 33, my understanding is that this, if you look at the figures, they've kind of hovered around the low 40s. So I don't think that 40 figure is anything to be concerned about. Obviously, the nature of each enforcement action, it could be a really simple one, could be absolutely huge. And so they will vary. But in terms of where this is recorded, as I understand it, once enforcement action has been taken, not necessarily when they've been remediated. There's been a response and they've responded to it and dealt with the issue. So I think it's once the action's been noticed, published.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hills and then Councillor Tandy.
Thank you. I am the shadow lead member of Performance and Administration. As such, I received a briefing on all of the relevant performance measures. We weren't armed with the reports and the graphs and the pictures and so on. We were presented with the figures, facts and figures and so on. We also deal with counter fraud. And without repetition tonight, everything was pretty satisfactory there. I'd also like to pay due regard to Pat Knight, who dealt with revenues and benefits, who I understand is recently retired. He did give us lots of good information in the past, particularly in regard to the lift arrangement, the low-income family tracker, which I thought's been very useful to everybody and helps lots of people on low incomes and so on. And I know that Pat did suffer some bad health recently, and he's subsequently retired, and I'm sure the whole committee would like to wish him well in his retirement. But we did run through all of the measures, so I don't propose to repeat all that this evening. But I do confess to a degree of bewilderment that Councillor Croxton referred to. I don't see how you could rush through all this page by page, and in line with the comment the leader of the council has made in the past about small text. I find it difficult to deal with these small iPads, and I find it difficult to deal with this tiny text when you're rushing from page to page. I don't think you can properly scrutinise in that manner. Furthermore, in the committee structure that used to deal with their respective subjects, they were normally chaired by the lead member of their respective portfolio. So in addition to questioning officers, we were also able to question lead members. I don't see that we can do that properly under this arrangement. Thank you.
Yeah, just before I bring in Councillor Tandy, I'll try and deal with those points. I mean, it is feedback from the LGA review of which the justification of these reports is based on. And as I said at the start of the meeting, that's something we can clarify how this now sits within the wider scheme. I think the point that Councillor Croxton made earlier about us doing some prior reading of papers, and I'm not saying here that no members have read the papers because I know you have, but actually informing the management team of what subjects might require individual responses from officer subject leads. There is nothing stopping us under the scrutiny procedural rules if there is a big issue where we see that one of the performance indicators is really out of line with where it should be, from us using the convening powers of this committee to invite the individual cabinet members to partake in these discussions. In terms of the cabinet's role in these PIs, that hasn't fundamentally changed. These reports still go to Cabinet. All members of this committee have the right, as do members of the public, to attend the Cabinet meeting where they'll be able to hear directly if concerns are being raised over a particular item, hear that justification. And I want to make this an open offer to any member of this committee that if we do ever find ourselves in circumstances where we are gravely concerned about one of the PI indicators, by all means raise that prior to the meeting, and we'll make sure that the relevant cabinet member and officers are here to provide that scrutiny that I think you were saying could be diluted if not within the general cabinet committees. The way that I foresee these changes working in practice going forward is that if we are in a circumstance where one of these performance indicators, or perhaps a grouping of them, is of concern, the paper will have gone to cabinet, it will come here to scrutiny, and there's nothing stopping the scrutiny committee making an informal recommendation back to an individual cabinet member, or indeed the cabinet, to say by the time of the next meeting of your committee, we want to see that on the agenda for wider input from those committee members. The whole purpose of moving these papers out of the regular committee system, or the cabinet committee system that we're all used to, is because there was a capacity overload on some of those committees, not all of them, but on some of them, Housing being a prime example of that with all the recent legislative changes that we've had. And there was a void in business for this committee, which, as members will note, has led to a number of these meetings being cancelled over recent years. So I'm pretty happy with the way that this new setup will work. We've obviously got a lot of trial and error to do, and a lot of thinking about how we refine that process to ensure good governance, member input and member accountability. But what I would like to say is I think that once we get into the habit of looking through these papers, as Councillor Croxton said, informing officers of areas of interest, this committee can play a hugely important role in making sure that these PIs are being monitored properly by us as elected members. But also, on a point of clarity, I just want to say that I think the other role that this committee can play that cabinet committees would not have the time to play is we need to be looking at this in the context of the corporate plan. Because one thing you can't do on individual cabinet committee meetings is look at the council's overall performance and see where major issues are arising. And I'd like to think that in reviewing these on a quarterly basis, we will be able to flag if there are problems within particular directorates, if the council is swaying from its priorities in the corporate plan, so that we can make recommendations back to cabinet to make sure that this council is where it should be. Hopefully, Councillor Hills, that touches upon your question.
Could I briefly say, if I may, I hope you're right. I hope it is successful, but I have noted when during cabinet meetings that I've attended as an observer that on several items that arise regarding performance measures, the chairman of the cabinet, i.e. the council leader, often says it'll be thoroughly scrutinised at respective cabinet committees and F&A, of course. So if they're all going to be fed back here, I only found out about this, by the way, just in advance of the P&A meeting where I saw that these were no longer with us. Then, of course, we've got to take more time to read in advance and try and take note of all portfolios where there might be matters arising. And I've got my doubts, but I hope hope you're right. I hope it's a success. And it might ease the burden of committees, but it adds a lot more burden to the overview scrutiny committee.
I will come to you, Councillor Tandy. I absolutely agree with you on those points. As I said earlier, I think communication is important on this, and I think it would be useful through you, Chloe, if possible, that we actually circulate. Again, I know all members will have received it at some point, but the actual feedback from the LGA peer review, because that external review had a look at the role the members play, the role the officers play, capacity of the various committees, as I've already outlined. And their thinking was, as part of that review process, that scrutiny could, but actually on a statutory basis, should be doing much more with general oversight. And like you said, I hope as well. I fully acknowledge that this is going to substantially increase the workload of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So the pressure is on us as elected members, I think, to step up and make sure that this committee is actively contributing to the success of this or us as a local authority. And I'm going to stop there, Councillor Tandy, before we...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jamie. Sorry, skipping back to something else now, so taking it away from there. Page 37, so that's page 27 of the plan, the report pack itself. So it's just talking about animal licensing, and I see that there's essentially a star system for there. So you got 5, 4, 3, 2. Thankfully, no ones. But what I wanted to get some clarification on was that there's a license with 2 stars, and then there's licenses that have not been rated but still issued. So could we have some clarifications as to what these licenses then essentially entail, and whether the star system gives any kind of, like formalization of like not giving licenses to the individual due to its ranking. So yeah, just wanted to pick up on that because a bit of uncertainty there. Thank you.
I'm afraid that will be one left to take away. But as I understand it, yeah, they would not get a license if they haven't, they don't achieve the basic standard, then they wouldn't receive a license at all. But in terms of the star rating system, we can certainly provide a briefing note on that.
think that's a really good point, Councillor Tandy, and actually is useful because it really does encompass the point that Councillor Croxton made earlier. But in addition to that, just for full transparency, we'll make sure that when that important point, which I think that the public will be interested in seeking clarity on, we'll attach whatever briefing notice circulated to you to the minute pack of this meeting, because it's important that we have answers in the public forum. Just before I go back to Jamie to take us through the rest of the report, Councillor Hill has caught me up in procedure, and it was completely remiss of me not to also mention the committee's thanks, and indeed my personal thanks to Pat Knight. I think all councillors appreciate the time, energy and passion that he had for his directorate, and the incredible amount of work that both he and his team did with the low income family tracker that has lifted people out of poverty in this borough, which is something that I think he should be very proud of in terms of his retirement now, that he has literally transformed lives in this borough through that work, obviously alongside his colleagues as well. And apologies again, it was remiss of me not to welcome Dave Reynolds to his first Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting this evening. Dave has recently joined our organisation as one of our principal accountant, or the principal accountant, I should say, for the General Fund. So a big welcome to you, Dave, and thank you for joining us tonight. Over to you, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There weren't any other areas I wanted to draw out in particular. Just following on your comments around Pat, I will say that we're still in contact with Pat, so I'll make sure your kind comments this evening will be passed on to him. I'll do that personally. And also, just as a mention of the lift product, we've now seen that product lift over 1,000 families out of poverty now. So that is an incredibly powerful statistic, and it's reflected in some of the stats we've got in this report today.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie. I've got Councillor Elliott, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to look at page 14 of the report pack. 17, did I say 14? No, I meant 17. The contact centre figures, just looking at those, the abandoned call rate averaged around 31%, up from just under 17% the year before, which is not far off a doubling. Now, I see it's in line with Q1 and Q2. With Q4 there, 3 quarters out of the 4, so roughly a third of residents who rang us couldn't get through. The fact that that's 3 of the quarters feels like that's becoming a new normal, and the report, I think, sets out some good steps to tackling that. The telephony demand, looking at the queues, the channel shift, and handling times down. I think that's all really good. Apologies if I missed it. I'm just wondering if is there a sense of a target we're aiming for to try and get back down to, and a rough idea of a timeline we might like to get there for? What does success look like? Thank you.
We've had some lengthy conversations about the abandoned call rates. I think generally, obviously, it's a worrying trend. However, we could also look at some of the people that have called up. They then decide to go online. A lot of the information that people phone up about will still be available online. And so we hope that that's what some people are doing. I think we've historically had really good call wait times here. They've always been really low, and even during COVID and things like that, and post-COVID, you'd expect to be on the phone for half an hour sometimes waiting to get through to a company. Ours have always been sub 10 minutes, and originally 1 or 2 minutes. So I think that shift, people who are used to phoning us are saying, well, hold on a minute, it's 5 minutes now, I give up, this is not normal. And so we have seen a shift in the call wait times that I think is probably a permanent shift, and near 10 minutes in some cases. That's not great, but I still don't think that's terrible, compared to other organisations. So I still think that's a reasonable amount of time for people to wait. So that has had an impact on the abandon rates, I think, just because of established expectations. What we are doing, as the report outlines in the narrative, a number of measures to try and improve that. We're looking at ways we can structure the team better. We have had quite a high turnover of staff many of the team have moved into other parts of the organisation, so it's great for those individuals, but not so great for the team when they have to train up people from scratch. Having that knowledge, the local knowledge and understanding the different teams and the way we work here is incredibly valuable. And so when we're training new people up, it does take a while for us to get back up to speed. So we have struggled a little bit in terms of staffing resource. We are making some changes to how the phone lines work. And so I believe this is now in place. So normally when you phone up and you've got 5 options, or press 9 and anything else, we've taken that off now. And that's having an impact. Maybe some people are just pressing any number. So we're testing a few things out. We have explored another mention of AI, but whether the use of AI in our telephone system could be something we could implement. I think that's a really long-term and quite innovative approach. So right now, that's probably not going to help us. But is there more we could do in terms of automation and information that can be provided without someone having to pick up the phone? And as I say, maybe structuring the teams in a different way. We've talked about having a kind of welfare function where we focus on the welfare from every angle, including the calls that come through. So there's a fair amount of work to do, but I don't think we're going to go back to those kind of minute-and-a-half call wait times, and that will have an impact on the abandon rates.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Elliott. I think it's a really important point that you've just raised, because I often speak, and you'll be pleased to know, in their breaks, so I'm not taking away from their call time. Our exceptional call handling staff and contact centre team here at the council, who do an absolutely incredible job, often putting up, sadly, with abuse and anger in a very, very professional way that I don't think comparable organisations do as well as we do. They are highly dedicated to their role, and I think in addition to what Jamie's just added, it's really important to note that there has been huge legislative changes in recent years. I'm thinking about things like Arab's law with the damp and mould that has increased number of people making calls into our housing team, for example, but also, of course, the cost of living crisis that has put people, or I should say families and individuals in this borough, under huge strain and caused them to need greater service provision from us as a local authority. So I think it'd be amiss to look at that PI in isolation, just in terms of call targets not being met, which I think is a valid point, but actually contextualising that into areas that are fully outside of the control of us as a local authority, but that we are dealing with, and I think adequately. I would even go further to say doing very well in terms of the response that we are providing to residents that need the maximum amount of help in a very quick way. Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jamie. Just moving it along to a different page now, page 46. There is a little part about data breaches. So not going into panic mode, but it says here that we're still waiting for the report to come back from the ICO in this quarter. Could you, one, let us know if that has come back, and 2, where there have been 5 data breaches that were reported to the information governance team, was the appropriate kind of follow-ups of like staff training or mitigations placed around those breaches afterwards? Really important in this day and age to keep on top of that. Thank you.
I don't believe we've had a response in terms of that particular case. As I understand it, that's still outstanding, but you're absolutely right. Where we have, whether notifiable or not notifiable, there's always lessons to be learned. And we've had one recently where that's immediately triggered a number of changes, training. Sometimes there may need to be disciplinary action on some of these cases. Our training is significant now, particularly in terms of understanding, phishing and scams. And so, all staff have to go through quite significant training that has to be done on a regular basis, and we ensure that there's compliance with that. So, management team monitor returns, and we all make sure that everybody completes that. So, but yeah, absolutely, there's a full kind of lessons learned process in each of those breaches. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just want to turn back to the comment that Jamie made about the use of AI, because we are now concluding our planning review scrutiny subgroup. Indeed, we've concluded Lee's group on homelessness within the borough. So we will be getting to the stage where we will be setting future topic reviews very soon. And actually not just in terms of customer contact, but I think one of those subjects that might be useful, AI is part and parcel now of daily life for everyone, not just us as an organisation. And I think a holistic view across the entire organisation, of how we can implement AI into working practices to achieve outcomes, but also looking in detail at the risks associated with it and the safeguardings that we would need to put in place could be a really interesting subject for us to look at as a future scrutiny review. So we can obviously add that to an agenda of another meeting to make sure that we've got reviews lined up for the second half of the year. I just hope we never get to the stage of Albania, who appointed an AI cabinet minister. I mean, I don't know what John's view would be on replacing the cabinet with AI, and it's not for me to say, but there are limits to the use of technology, and we must always make sure, I think, that where we can, we show the human face of this council and indeed elected members. I've just got a couple of questions, and I'm really going to annoy members here because I jotted down PI numbers instead of page numbers, so you'll have to bear with me. But one of them is PI 10, which concerns the attendance or footfall rates within our parks and open spaces. And I want to link that directly, or to check that there's no correlation between the decline that we've seen in Q4 of people using our parks and open spaces and the increase in antisocial behaviour incidents that we see under PI 1, because it's concerning. I think that there's been a rise in antisocial behaviour incidents, and it would be good to seek clarity on whether that's an increase in antisocial behaviour generally, or perhaps the result of increased reporting and increased outreach work by either the police or indeed our officers in the community safety unit. And again, just linking back, because I wouldn't want to see that there is an increase of antisocial behaviour that's driving the public away from feeling that they can relax and seek leisure within the many beautiful parks and open spaces that we have across the borough.
We certainly do have, pockets of public space where there are ASB concerns, particularly of an evening. And that's something that we've been looking to address by making the parks more vibrant, more of a destination. So, for example, a place like Windmill Hill, where it's a beautiful space, but not necessarily well used some of the time. Bringing in a concession there that's selling coffee and some amazing cakes and things has really transformed that space. So people use it as a meeting space now. It's safe. We're looking to see how we can improve that area as well in terms of the gardens and the unused bowls court. And we're doing the same at Woodlands. We've got a concession due to come in there. And we've had a real focus, obviously, around the prom, which I know has been an ongoing issue, particularly the Fort Gardens as well, of an evening with antisocial behaviour, drug use, etc. And that's something we've been targeting with CCTV and rapid deployment CCTV. So I wouldn't say the two stats are necessarily directly linked. I don't think people are avoiding our parks anymore because of antisocial behaviour. And of course, the statistics we see in here around ASB is the number of reports that we receive as a council. So that's more around can often be around how proactive we are, the fact that people are coming to us. Same with safeguarding referrals, which has jumped up significantly, but that's not a bad sign. That is staff within the organisation being much more mindful of safeguarding and after sometimes over-reporting, actually.
That's really useful to know, and I think should fill us all with some confidence, because the last thing we'd want to see is antisocial behaviour stopping footfall within our parks, because we all know that a decline in footfall in these precious open spaces then leads to a lack of community ownership, which then in turn increases antisocial behaviour. So it's a very, very vicious circle, and that's why I think it's useful to discuss it in the context that we just have done. In terms of, I'm very happy for you to come back to me on this one. How do we record those figures? Because do we have sensors in the parks that operate footfall, or is it more of a guesstimate, or is there some logic behind the methodology to come up with these footfall figures?
I'm not entirely sure what they're based on in this report. What I do know is that for town centre footfall, for example, we have a sensor just outside McDonald's, I think it is, which physically ticks every time someone goes past that particular spot. We have also invested in another system, which has been hit and miss, to be honest, but that uses GPS data. And I know the parks team were looking at using that. So it may be that that's informed by the GPS data. And what that does, it kind of scales up the number of people who've got the right app on their phone that is tracking them and telling us where they've come from, where they've been, how long they've spent there. So I'll have to double check where these figures are from, whether it's from that GPS data.
Thank you. I just hope the one outside of McDonald's isn't recording every pigeon movement that we get through the town. But Councillor Milner.
Thank you. Yes, I had brunch on the prom this morning with a Gravesham Access Group, and we invited a few other people with disabilities and mental health issues, and we called it that to join us for brunch on the prom to combat loneliness and isolation, and it worked. We had lots of people talk to us, and they wasn't from the area. They moved down, from Bexley Heath and things, and it was quite a good idea, which turned it a brunch on the prom, and that's something that perhaps we could promote with the cafe. And it was lovely, but even the Addy zone was being used. I did sort of threaten that I was going to go on the exercise things, but I didn't quite do it.
Always a next time, Councillor Milner. But just on that point, I think you raise an incredibly important point, that our parks are not only in open spaces, not only exceptionally beautiful, that we're very, very lucky to have them, but increasing the opportunity for members of the public who may have not used them to visit them is vitally important. And I think maybe as a suggestion that perhaps could be taken back informally is that the council's website lists all of our parks and open spaces. Perhaps it's time, referencing your event by the Gravesham Access Group, who also need to be commended on the work that they've done for this borough over the years. Maybe we could have a section on that website under each of the parks' upcoming community events, so that the general public know. And I don't want to reflect on last night's planning committee meeting or bring it up, but I've spent a lot of time recently in Woodlands Park to consider the impact that particular application may have had on different aspects of the park. And the one thing that struck me is you've got multiple generations and multiple groups across this borough using the park and using it well on an informal basis. And I know, for example, a number of local football teams that do incredible work for young people in this borough are using the park on a regular basis. But how does the public find out about that? And I think we can do a lot of work informally, actually, around promoting or giving those small groups in this borough a bit of a hand in advertising the good work that they're doing in our open spaces to the wider community. So perhaps, Jamie, if that's something that could be taken back.
Yeah, very happy to do that. And I think really sensible suggestion in terms of how we can promote events when we're talking about the individual parks. It'd be great, wouldn't it, if each parks page had a kind of listing embedded in that page. Also worth mentioning the active Gravesham website as well. So it's a really key resource that the team help support. And of course, we're doing this pilot at the moment with Sports England. So we have been identified as a priority place by Sports England. And so we have this partnership at the moment that Active Kent and Medway are leading on, but we're very much actively engaged in that. In fact, last Friday, we were in this very room with leaders across the health and wellbeing sector, businesses locally, as well as public sector organisations, to talk about how we can come up with sort of community-led ideas for how we get people more active. In particular, we're focusing on two wards, but I think we have to look at, in particular, the north of the borough and where we have levels of inactivity across Northfleet and Gravesend, but we have identified Westcourt and North Northfleet as the areas where that is most acute. But there's we think there's about 1.5, nearly £2 million there in that project that we can draw upon within Gravesham to support that. And so there's an opportunity, some really innovative ideas at St Gregory's. And we had a really good community event there recently to understand from the community what they wanted, how they wanted to see those open spaces improved. And one of the things we had, there's assisted accommodation adjacent to the park, and people said it's quite a big park. We're halfway around. We need to sit down, and there's no benches. So there's a really simple thing. Let's get some benches, and then people will use it more. So lots of work going on to do that. Obviously, you'll be aware of some of the improvements we're doing to parks. So the imminent one is St Andrews Gardens, second phase, and making that much more of a usable space where people could have, come and do their yoga, but we could have events and markets. So a much more usable space than it was before. And we're looking at a number of play parks as well in terms of how we can upgrade facilities there. And talking to the prom, we are talking to the owner, the tenant of the cafe about how we can support him to improve the offer there at the cafe. And we've got, hopefully, going to be allocating some funding to support that and potentially some additional play equipment at the park.
Thank you. And also, I think with the prom, the Gravesham Access Group asked a couple of years ago to see if we can have a platform on the promenade when there's some music events, because if you are in a wheelchair, you're low, and you've got all these people standing up in front of you, in front of the entertainment, you can't see. And I was very pleased, and I hope it will be there this weekend, so that you can push the wheelchair onto the platform so that you are the height that you can actually see what's going on at the stage and around. So I will be popping down to have a little look to see if we are going to use it, this year. So again, some of our community committees, they do come up with some good ideas, and I think, and where would we be anywhere in the world without volunteers?
Certainly never want to miss a timely intervention, Councillor Milner, but very valid points that you've just made. And I think it's really important for us all, like you said, to think, where would we be without the volunteers and the voluntary groups within this organisation? And just anecdotally, I walk my dog down at the prom quite often in the early hours of the morning. One particular day I was late and I ended up walking my dog just after around 9:30, and I saw this. It was a huge group of ladies walking down the riverfront, and just out of interest, I wanted to engage them in conversation. So I said, "Bit chilly to be walking this morning." This was in February, and they informed me that they were a completely informal group of mums from the local school. They had just dropped their children off at school that morning. And what they did, even despite the weather, and particularly because of how depressed people can feel within those winter months, they determined that they would do it completely informally to get all of those mums together so that no one was sitting at home on their own, and that they had a collective support group, which, again, there are so many instances of that happening across the borough. And going back to the point that you made, Councillor Milner, about being grateful for the voluntary efforts in this borough, I think we also need to look at this from the council perspective, and I think Kent County Council need to consider this in terms of adult social care and mental health costs, that if it weren't for those voluntary groups, our system would be overloaded with increased health inequalities, but particularly on the mental health side of work, the fact that these voluntary groups are getting people out and enjoying our spaces in very practical, informal ways is something that I think us as a council can encourage and play a more enabling role of over the years to come. So thank you for raising it, Councillor Milner. Any other points that the members want to raise on the performance indicators? I've just got one more myself, which is PI 70, which is on meeting attendance by councillors. Again, this might be one, I'm very happy for you to come back to me on this one. It's just on methodology, how we're recording that figure. So are we seeing a decline of member attendance, and does those figures, say if somebody gives their apologies for a meeting, does that apology mean that our numbers are skewed and go down even if a substitute is then in place? And that PI description also includes references to the mayor's diary, for example. Is that somehow factored into overall attendance rates of councillors? I just would like some clarity, because I think it's important, given the public-facing role that councillors play, that figure's broken down a bit more, and that the actual way we formulate that figure is calculated, because it's not immediately clear to me.
In terms of the commentary around the Mayor's Diary, I think it's completely separate. What you'll see from the commentary that you've got against each of these PIs, they're often quite wide, so they're not just necessarily around the PI. It can be around the service area more generally. So I don't believe there's a direct link. Now, Chloe may be able to come in on this. I'm not sure if she's been involved in gathering the data, but my understanding is that we were capturing formal meetings, and if a substitute has been sent, it would still be apologies for that individual, so it would still be recorded in the attendance figures. But Chloe, can you tell any more?
Yeah, so we will generate a report, and then that report will list if a member has given their apology, and then it tallies up between where they're expected, what apology they've given, etc. And then we'll collate an overall figure at the end of that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from members on any of the PIs this evening? Councillor Milner. Yeah.
Yes, just at the very beginning. And it's about the EV charging. I understand that there is a consultation at the moment starting with, I think, at the Joint Transportation Board I attended. I just wondered how widespread that the consultation is going out to, so that people can put a little pin on a thing on the screen and pinpoint where they would like the EV points put all through the borough. And I was quite interested in probably making sure that the parish councils are going to take part as well as individuals to where they live, because we don't all live in the town. And it's quite wide, our borough, and I'd quite like to know how this is going along. Have you had any answers back to where people would like the EV charging points?
I'm afraid I don't know in terms of feedback from the consultation. So it's certainly something we can come back on. Obviously, in terms of making sure that EV chargers are available across the borough, the planning system now has a role to play in terms of new homes, and these particular points, it's just one part of the plans because it's a particularly funded scheme. But certainly, once that consultation is back, that's something we can share. And if I can get some more information from the team, more than happy to.
Thank you very much. Well, not seeing any other hands, I'd like to refer members of the committee to page 5 of the agenda, please. The recommendation is this report is for information purposes only, but I think it's been a very productive debate, and I know Jamie's got a lot of informal notes that can now hopefully be taken back, some of which may end up on various other cabinet committee agendas for greater input by those various committees. I'd like to commend the committee and indeed Jamie for the role that he's played in being able to answer very quick fire questions across the council's directorates. And indeed, I note the comments that were raised by Councillor Hills and Croxton about how we can improve the process of this going forward. But actually, I think it's been a worthwhile exercise. I think we've proven the role that this committee can play in scrutinising effectively the performance indicators. But like I said, I think we've got a way to go to streamline the process in the future. So turning back to that recommendation, are all members happy to note the report, please?
Yes.
Agreed. Thank you very much. That then takes us back to the main agenda, going now on to item 7, which is the General Fund Provisional Outturn Report for 2025-26. And I believe I'm handing over to Dave at this stage, please.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you for the earlier welcome as well. So the report starts on page 57. So it is the General Fund Provisional Outturn Report for 25-26. It's marked as provisional because it is still subject to audit. It's a favourable position. It's in line with the projections that were reported at Q3. And whilst the council still needed to use its general reserve to meet the kind of net expenditure for the year, this was reduced by 857,000. So rather than using the 2.81 million projected when the budget was set, we actually only used, we used 1.95 million pounds worth of our general reserve. During the year, the council has continued to kind of manage kind of the financial challenges and generating that strong kind of revenue returns from its kind of property portfolio. Also kind of looking at positive financial returns from its kind of balancing the budget programme, which has taken place throughout 25-26. There's also been strong management and innovation, as referred to earlier, around the provision of temporary accommodation, lower than anticipated support to GCLL, and increased income from investment activity. So at the end of the financial year, the council is in a position where it does have lower than its minimum recognised level of working balances, which is kind of sits at the recommended level is 5.25 million. So it means that we still need to kind of rebuild resilience as we move through kind of 26-27. The table on page 64 sets out the earmark reserves, and as at the 31st of March 2026, they were kind of at £12.6 million. In terms of the capital programme, kind of the final outturn position was 30.5 million against the total budget for the year of 35.5 million, and there is some detail around the schemes contained within the reports. I won't say any more in terms of that, a kind of introduction, bearing in mind the earlier conversation about not having all the subject matter experts around the table. The same may apply in this report. So, and given my relatively newness, I may need to take some more points back for briefing notes than I might wish to, but I'm sure that will prove as time goes on. So happy to take questions.
That's a brilliant introduction, and thank you very much for that. But also, thanks also to the team that's been working on this behind the scene, and actually just all of our staff here at Gravesham, because finances in local authorities are probably the toughest that they've ever been. And there's a hell of a lot of good work that's gone into stabilising this council's financial position over recent years, including some very, very tough decisions that's been made to streamline service provision in a way that still protects our residents, which has increased the workload of officers and substantially increased the workload of our finance and corporate service teams. So that's not underappreciated in any way. Do any members have any questions on this report? Thank you, Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dave. Hi. So just wanted to ask a very half-baked question almost. So in some of the points, like for example in 3.8.1, it does say how the conflict in the Middle East has created a bit of impact on the council's finances. Are we seeing that there is now a change in tide with that, seeing as how the conflict is starting to die down almost? Obviously, we know we're not there completely, but how is it looking in terms of the conflict with our finances? Thank you, Chair.
So I'll answer that from an investment and a borrowing perspective. So you are correct. We saw inflation or interest rates increased significantly during that period. They have started to come off slightly, but we are still seeing PWLB rates still quite elevated to where we would necessarily anticipate them to be at this moment in time. So as a consequence, we're when we need to take on external debt and some borrowing, we're maximising the ability to use the HRA discounted rates from PWLB because that's more favourable, and then looking to local authorities. This time of year, local authorities have a bit more cash, so their rates tend to be a bit favourable to us. So it's trying to take the borrowing at the right time, and then when we do have surplus monies that we can invest, that we're using the best places that we can for those.
I've got Councillor Croxton, Councillor Ashenden, and then Councillor Hills.
Yes, could I don't know if it's related to the question we've just been asked. 357 corporate management expenses, 780,000 adverse variance. I don't quite understand that. I wonder if anybody could explain that in simple terms. I'm a bear of little brain in that respect. And 344, which is for St George's Centre net income, it again a very significant adverse variance taken together. They do amount to a very large sum of money.
So I'll do the expected credit loss. So it is an accounting term that we're dealing with here. So we have to look for the total loans that we have issued Rocherville. There is a requirement for us under the government guidance that we have to calculate whether we think we will get 100% of that money back from Rocherville. It is a complex transaction, and it's a complex calculation that we have to employ a specialist. So we use Arlen Close in this case, and they put it through an extensive calculation in terms of what an entity like Rocherville can be expected to pay of its total debt. And then we're required to make an assessment on that and then charge that through the revenue account. So it is not a real charge to us at this moment in time. It'll only become a real charge at the point Rocherville may or may not be able to pay its full rate. It did go up this year because we've issued Rocherville with more loans during the course of the year. It may be as we start to get to a position where Rocherville starts to repay its loans, that assessment actually becomes beneficial and then becomes a credit to us. So.
I think I understand that. And the St George's Centre, is that ever going to turn around?
I maybe pass over Jamie to give a bit more context, luckily as he is around. But I mean, it's one of those kind of issues that affects every kind of council across the country nowadays in terms of the whole kind of cost of living kind of thing, and then the kind of the impact that has on kind of the people's ability to pay and the ability to kind of keep shops open does mean that there are kind of more vacant kind of lots in there than you might wish to do. I'm sure Jamie's team kind of managed that quite vigorously kind of throughout the year to kind of limit that loss to kind of as to make it as kind of cost effective as it can be. But I don't know if you know. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we've had, I suppose, a perfect storm really with St George's in recent, I'd say over the last couple of years. We've made huge efforts to try and diversify the activities and things that we're doing there. We have been hit with a market where retail rents are coming down each time. So, for example, we have a long-standing tenant in there. They know that they attract footfall. It comes to a rent review. So they're pushing to reduce their rent. They're looking for rent-free periods. That means when we're doing that renewal, we pay fees to our agents to do that. So we end up paying out fees to have a reduced rental income or no rental income for a period of 6 months. That's just on a rent review. And that's not that we're negotiating poorly. That is a national picture where we're seeing that tenants, particularly those that attract footfall, we have a few national brands in the centre still, there's that downward pressure on rents. We've had a few unsuccessful lets. I'll give you an example of one where we spent £150,000 on landlord works to get the unit ready for a tenant to move in. They moved in, they had a significant rent-free period. When that ended, they just didn't pay the rent. That unit's been foreclosed on now, and now we're having to go for an expensive legal process. So, there's been a few examples like that have been really painful for us in the last couple of years. What we have done, and obviously, we know that the St George's Shopping Centre is an ageing asset. It's expensive to maintain. There are some significant capital works that are going to need to be undertaken over the coming years. And of course, because it's a shopping centre, if you rent a unit on New Road, you pay your rent. If you rent a unit in the shopping centre, you pay your rent, and you pay service charges, which are almost as much or in some cases more than the rent. So it's really difficult for us to be competitive, but we do what we can. And we have some really interesting lets going on at the moment. We're going down that route of diversifying the uses, so bringing in more community uses. And we should have a few tenants we're going to be announcing and projects we'll be announcing shortly, which will be really exciting for footfall and offer for families. We're doing more pop-ups over the summer. We'll have the Sandpit at the Beach event that was really popular last summer. And of course, we're investing through the Levelling Up Fund in some of the facilities and spaces, including the inclusive play area at the back of the centre. We have also just commissioned a significant report to look at the asset, so get a fresh pair of eyes on it, to say what could we be doing in the longer term to make that asset work better for us. I've clocked about 19 recommendations which we're going to implement from that review, and so we have an action plan. But let's be frank, it's an expensive asset to own. It probably has a lifespan of another 10 years, and then potentially will be a regeneration project. But for those 10 years, we've got to invest at the level that will keep it safe and operating.
Thank you. Just before I bring in the other councillors who are waiting, I'm not going mad. The reason my eyes keep darting around the floor is because we've been joined by a little mouse in the chamber this evening. He's everywhere at the moment. He keeps darting around. The reason I'm drawing reference to that is if any member has a bag or a coat on the floor, please put it on the chair next to you, because I wouldn't want you to be driving home tonight and something to jump out at you. So, yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. I think it's good I pointed it out, because the last thing you'd want is it. Yeah, but yeah, please, if you do have coats or bags.
I've got 2 cats at home.
Next time, Lee. And just, yeah, nice to have some participation in the meeting, isn't it? Just turning back to Lee's very important points, and it is important regarding the St George's Centre, but actually the substantial challenges that businesses are facing in terms of viability at the moment, with the changes to business rates and indeed increasing their ability to be able to deal with some of the extreme fluctuations that we've seen in terms of energy and utility costs, increased service charges on some of these rental agreements that they have in place. Our last budget meeting, we did include in there a provision to set up new funding arrangements, basically on a discretionary scheme to support some of those small independent businesses. The working group, I'm really pleased to say, for that scheme is going to meet with it by the end of this month to establish the process by which we can provide an additional layer of support to those businesses to help keep our vacancy rates low, notwithstanding the points that Jamie's obviously made about the challenges individually around the St George's Centre, which I think, to be fair, are no different to a number of other local authorities who own these centres, the challenges that they're facing. I mean, the one thing I would say about the St George's Centre is many other local authorities of a comparable size have actually had to sell off their shopping centres, and sadly in most cases, once they're sold off, the provision is lost completely, because the only viable use for such big sized sites is to convert into housing. So we've got that coming down the line in terms of additional support, which I just think is very worth noting. Councillor Ashenden.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question, it's more an observation. I feel that we're focusing on the negative, whereas we should be focusing on the positive, that we reduced our drawdown from the working balances by 857k. Now, that's despite the two adverse variances in communities and inclusive growth and corporate services. So this is a positive, and it's got to be seen as that. I'd like to thank Dave and Alex for bringing this report. Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Ashenden. I absolutely agree with you that there's a substantial amount of good news within this report, and I just wanted to draw attention on page 60 to 3.4.1 because it's frankly quite remarkable that our leisure centres in this borough are ending up with a 246k favourable variance, and that actually, I think, bucks a trend that we're seeing with publicly owned, again, GCLL, who run them on behalf of the council, obviously a private entity, but we are seeing these spaces lost. The fact that by working with our finance colleagues at this authority, they've been able to deliver that needs to be commended, because they are vital resources for our community. And with, as Councillor Tandy noted earlier, challenges in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, inflation rates being completely unstable on a level that we've not seen before, to be able to deliver that variance for this council is incredible. And like you said, this is a good news report that we have in front of us, and you're absolutely right to draw attention to that, Dave.
Yeah, just to add, it kind of goes back to the earlier point about St George's as well. I mean, part of the fact that it overall is a positive report, I think that what that means for us as a kind of accountancy function is we need to work with the services to kind of realign some of those budgets as well, to kind of not have unrealistic income targets for certain services and as we move forward. So I think there's things about that we can take forward, which hopefully means there's less to report on because you've kind of got the budgets in the right place effectively. But overall, I say it is a positive report. I mean, going forward, that there is a kind of a balanced medium-term financial plan as well for the authority. So it is a good place to be in financially. But obviously, you can't take anything for granted. So you need to be prudent with all that we do. So.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Hills and then Councillor Tandy.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to make a similar comment to Councillor Ashenden. I attended the discussion at Cabinet, not that I was involved in it, but I listened to it, and they seem to be of the view that the accounts are in good order, despite the need for a nearly £2 million drawdown from working balances. One of the reasons our accounts must be in good order is that a decision was made some years ago to utilise our interim funds to invest in property assets and property bonds. The Cabinet also expressed concern that come LGR, Local Government Reorganisation, if our accounts are in good order, we don't want other groups that may join a unitary authority to benefit from our prudence some years ago. Have you any comment on that at all, please?
Well, I won't get drawn on any kind of political kind of aspects of the kind of the question. I think it comes back to that earlier point I said about just kind of maintaining prudence in what we do. We need to kind of budget for things efficiently. You need to kind of invest in the borough to kind of make the best of things for residents where it's appropriate, but it needs to be where it's appropriate. But I am but a back office accountant, so I won't really kind of push anything else on that. If that's okay.
I wasn't trying to make a political point in any way. I'm referring to the fact that the investments that I referred to, property assets and property bonds, the profits of which can all be utilised in the general fund, if I'm not wrong. I agree with the Cabinet that if we have any good news on the economic front, we don't really want any perhaps less prudent councils to take advantage of that in the not too distant future. Could I ask another question then?
Sorry, Councillor Hills, just before you do, I'd like to come back on that point. I absolutely agree with you. I think the property investments, I think it's fair to say, played a substantial role in saving us from being in dire financial straits. I was around the table with you at the time back in 2015-16 when we did the Bridging the Gap, balancing the budget exercise. And I think on a cross-party basis, that's something that all members and indeed officers should be proud of, because it's reflected in these papers and previous budget setting reports that we've had just how much of an impact that's had. I do personally think that now might be the time for us to evaluate whether potentially through borrowing or raising funds in other ways, it might be worth us looking at that as a viable option to strengthen the council in the future. Lenny's committee, which hopefully someone will correct me on, I think it's the Commercial Services Cabinet Committee. It's one that I can never remember the name of, so apologies for that. But that has regular updates on the property dashboard, which reflects the vacancy rates of some of these units, and that committee discusses in great detail, actually, often in Part B, because you must be remembered that these are commercial terms of which the council has individual and private agreements with the leaseholders and tenants of these property investments. So it is worth attending that committee, and I'd encourage all members to do so if you want the complete overview and value actually of these financial investments, as well as discussing some of the risks. But going back to your earlier point about the success of them, I do think they have been highly successful. I do think it's a very valid point that you make, and perhaps it's for Councillor Rolls's committee to take a detailed look, not saying that we repeat the exercise en masse, and obviously we'd have to factor in the effects of LGR on this, but there could be opportunities in the future to look at further investments now that that pot of money or of the original investment has been drawn down. But yeah, I think it was a very fair answer that you gave, Dave. So thank you for that. Over to your second point, Councillor Hill.
I note that our working balances at the end of March were £3.3 million, but we have general fund earmarked reserves of something like £12.5 million. And I just wondered if all of those so-called earmarked reserves are absolutely essential or intended expenditure that we couldn't avoid.
So at the point they were put into those reserves, they would have been kind of earmarked for a specific purpose. You're right, things do move on. So it's worthwhile to undertake a review of all of those kind of earmarked reserves to see if they still need to be earmarked for that original purpose, or if they can be released back into kind of the working balances reserve to get back to the kind of the 5.25 or used for some other kind of investment which is kind of worthwhile. Yes.
I'm okay like this. Sorry. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alex and Dave. Not to take away from the positive, but I just wanted to ask on page 69, the Warm Homes Grant, it says that there were some unforeseen delays in that being spent. I was just wondering what happened there and whether we are, definitely able to make sure that grant is spent in this quarter. Thank you.
I think that's one we'll need to take away and come back to you on, if that's okay. It's fine.
Thank you very much, and we will make sure for complete public transparency the answers to very important questions are included, as I said earlier, in part of the minutes that come out from this committee. Again, to steal your phrase, I don't want to draw on negatives, and I'm conscious I've got Councillor Ashenden to my side, so I'll be quick on this point. And again, I'm not making to look a political point out of this, but if we turn to page 61, 3.4.5, it is concerning that in parking services we're seeing an adverse variance of £108,000 in terms of lower budgeted income. And the reason I raise that is because this money is substantial, and the last thing I would want to see as an indirect consequence to this is us not being able to maintain our car parks properly in the future due to that lower budgeted income that we see here, which is a substantial figure. It notes that part of this is because the Goodwara car park was handed back. But I think there is a concern that we have lost significant car parking spaces in terms of the charter development, and in terms, and I'm not sure this is probably too early to have been reflected into the 108k figure, but we've obviously now lost a substantial number of parking spaces with the Milton Place development. So the reason I raise this is because I just want to seek some clarity that obviously with the charter, I believe that there is the provision of some additional parking space provision in there. Do we foresee that there is enough parking provision in the charter to actually mean that when we look at this next time, that 108k figure is going to decrease and we're going to start to see an increase in the revenue that comes from parking in this borough? Thank you, Jamie.
Yes, so a few things to cover off there. So in terms of the adverse variance, yes, the Goodwara car park did mean we took a hit. There was some period of time before that was concluded, but we thought maybe they wouldn't go with a different provider. They did, and so that has had an impact. To be frank, the area where we've lost out in terms of income isn't necessarily about provision, having enough provision. I think where we've lost out is on some of the short stays. So I think we're not as competitive as some of the shopping centres, including our own at St George's, actually. But Thamesgate has been more competitive in terms of short stays outside of Saturdays and Sundays, of course. And so we have lost out on some of that. So that might be something that we want to reconsider in terms of our price points for 1 or 2 hour stays. In terms of the charter, that's a longer term, that this adverse variance that hasn't had an impact. Obviously, it's been out of action for some time now. We are due to have some public spaces made available through that scheme. It'll be around 100 public town centre spaces that will be brought online later this year, alongside, I think it's 75 for residents. So residents would be able to have their spaces, but 100 for the town centre. The team will be managing that, so it'll be managed by GBC. However, as it's a LATCO, so it's for our arm's length company, it will be under a slightly different charging structure.
Thank you for that. I mean, it may be me being a bit stupid, but I struggle to get my head around how the charter hasn't had a compounding interest on the 108 variants that we see here, because it is the substantial loss of a number of parking spaces, which has now been, as you rightly said, over some time, and that will have had a compounding effect on the income. And actually, it's not for this committee to say, and I know there are various challenges still ongoing with the charter scheme, but Rocherville Limited is a private company. What I would like to see, as that scheme does eventually recover some of the losses that it's incurred in the future, for us to look at the compounding effect that the losses of those car parking spaces have had averagely over the years, and to see whether or not we as a council, if Rocherville does reach a point of profitability on the charter scheme in the long term, whether or not there's opportunity to potentially recover some of those costs, because it is a substantial loss that I don't think has been fairly factored in to the financial way that Rocherville works in relation to paying back this council for the loss of that land opportunity. Councillor Elliott, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that parking services adverse variance, I'm just wondering, and it might be small change, and apologies if I've missed it from the report, how much do we spend on repairing things to do with car parks? I mean, the amount of times I've been through and I see that the gated teeth have been removed by somebody, or just last week, I think somebody had driven into the barriers again for the nth number of times it's happened, and I've no idea what that sort of thing costs. It might be small change, but wonder if that has an impact on us.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're not cheap to replace. I think it's in the £5,000 range to replace one of those barriers. We've refreshed them recently, so it's incredibly frustrating when people drive into them on a daily basis, and we're constantly picking it up and putting it up to one side. So yes, it's expensive equipment. Obviously, we work with a company called Sagos, who've introduced the system, so some of the costs for the equipment are met by them. But yeah, absolutely. We would have some significant costs. Obviously, we have an approach where we work across on street and off street, and some of which is done on KTC's behalf. So that's dealt with slightly differently in terms of the costs associated with that work.
I think that's a really important and valid point that you've just made, Councillor Elliott. I mean, it seems like every time I walk through the car park, there's some other damage. And just as an extension to that point, do we have enough CCTV, and are we able to look at cost recovery through people's insurance policies, etc.? Because I don't think it's something we can take our eye off. The odd £5,000 here, the odd £10,000 there adds up rapidly, and I think Councillor Elliott was right to raise this, because those small amounts of money can suddenly become substantial if we take our finger off the pulse. Not, of course, to mention the impact that it has on officer time, which again is a cost. So it'd be good to know if we can look at cost recovery, please.
Yes, certainly, and we've had some instances. We had an incredibly unlucky incident where a car crashed into the barrier system, and that also wiped out the electricity for the site. And that was, we've had one involved an uninsured driver. So there's been a number of issues which we have pursued through our insurance claims. And I do believe we were successful in the end. But yeah, again, it's an expensive, lengthy process, but we absolutely will claim where we can. And we have there's at least 2 cameras trained on that car park in particular when we're talking about Parrott Street.
Yeah, Councillor Ashenden and I remember that incident well, because it was in the early hours of the morning, and we'd just returned on the last train from London. And we saw the police and everything gathered there. I mean, it's actually quite a valid point, because are we seeing that more of these incidents happen at a particular time of day, perhaps overnight? is there any evidence to suggest that on some occasions they might be linked to potentially drink driving, or is it a lack of lighting? Do you know if there are any trends in reasons why we're seeing these incidents? Is it visibility? Is it criminality? Is it hard to say?
It's a number of reasons. I believe one of the incidents involved flip-flops, so it was footwear related. Foot got stuck down on an accelerator. So yeah.
I'm not even going to comment to that. Councillor Milner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't drive, as you know, but I've been in many cars getting a lift home from council meetings. And is it not a design fault? Because when you go on it, you're almost near the barrier on the ump before it goes up. And I'm wondering if people just misjudge it and they slip off the ramp thing. Because I could see that, that could probably be a problem. I wondered if the ramp could be about another 6 or 8 inches back, because you go up and you're there. So is it a problem that if you don't put your foot on the brake quick enough, you're going to hit that barrier?
For a non-driver, that's a very good point, actually. It is quite close, but we have had a number of changes and issues with flow plates and the distance, and we were restricted because of the design of the car park. And the main issue with the barrier actually is the entry barrier from Windmill Street. Yeah, that's where we have most of the issues. We can't quite work out why people keep on driving into it, but we can look into that particular issue. Being a regular user of that car park, I think it's fine, but it may have caused 1 or 2 incidents, but we can check that.
Okay, thank you all very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Milner, of course. I'm distracted by keeping my eyes rather than on my notes, so apologies to you, Councillor.
Yes, it's only a little one. It's only a little one, but perhaps the little mouse, only a little one. And perhaps we ought to invest in a council cat.
I second that motion. Are there any other questions, or are we happy to note the general fund report and thank Dave and Jamie and Alex for the contributions tonight? We all happy to note?
Yeah,
thank you very much. That then takes us on to item 8, which is the HRA provisional outturn report for 25-26, and I would like to hand over to Alex, please.
Thank you, Chair. So as I said, this is the provisional outturn for the HRA, and it starts on page 75. And as with the general fund report, it's a provisional outturn, as the accounts for 25-26 will be subject to an external audit in due course. So the HRA achieved a balanced outturn with an improved position to that which had been previously reported. Therefore, it is a positive outcome for the HRA. The outturn also enabled an additional £200,000 worth of external debt to be repaid in the year as to what had been budgeted. So whilst that's identified as an adverse variance within the report, this is a positive position for the HRA. There was a draw from the HRA priority reserve for £93,000 that was budgeted in the year. And we've also created a new reserve for Rose Street. So you may recall that there was a fire on those properties a couple of years back, and we've been working to reinstate those properties, and we're working through the insurance process with Zurich. So there is some monies being held in that reserve until we can finalise those claims. The HRA maintained its £3 million working balance, and the HRA general reserve balance stood at 1.75 million at the end of the year. From a capital position, the outturn spend was 20.6 million, and that was an overall variance of 13 million. A significant proportion of that 11 million was achieved through the new build programme. That budget originally included provision for the purchase of Crescent House, which didn't proceed during the course of the year. And it also included provisions for the development works at Lower Range Road and 107 Vale Road. Neither of those schemes came forward during the year as we was anticipating, but those schemes will be progressed in the new financial year. So whilst that money has not been spent in the current year, it's anticipated to be carried forward and used in future years. As at the end of 25-26, the HRA had capital resources of £9.6 million. And that was intended to go through in my introduction, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And whilst it's always a struggle with the HRA, to steal Councillor Ashenden line, I think it's really important that we note just how much hard work goes into maintaining this, because it is vital. This is how the council provides housing provision to people across the borough, and making sure that the HRA is in good order is vital. And I think it's really important, actually, that this committee plays a role. Sorry, got our mouse friend back. Plays a role in keeping a very close eye on these figures. One point that I'd just like to make, and it's not referring to any particular point within the HRA account, is I think it's worth everyone noting just how much legislative change that there's been in this area over recent years. And of course, not only the officer time that's been needed on that, but the substantial costs increase that will occur for us, not necessarily in the short term, but in maintaining some of the very high standards now that government expects upon us. So I'm just keen to understand if we're keeping a separate cumulative cost of the impact that these new pieces of legislation are having on the HRA, and whether or not in future budget setting periods, when we look at how much grant we think the government should be paying to us as a local authority, if there's any way that we can make formal representations to say, because of these recent legislative changes, our costs have increased by X, therefore our government grant should actually increase in a similar way. I don't know if that's possible or if that work's going on in the background at all.
So in terms of you are correct, there's obviously been huge changes within the HRA in terms of damp and mould requirements, the AWABS law that you mentioned earlier as well. So we do take account of those when we're setting the budget. And over the last couple of years, we've definitely increased provisions within the repairs and maintenance budgets to make sure that there's sufficient funds for them to tackle those particular areas. Unfortunately, there isn't much government grant available for the HRA. It is largely obviously tenant funded. There is some grants available for some of the capital works. So the HRA also had grants for social housing decarbonisation fund. It's had warmer home funding as well. So where possible, the team are very good at trying to access those grants and help those capital works by having that extra funding. So but obviously any consultations that come back out, we are very good at responding to all those and making sure that government are clear on the demands on that service.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because I and again, it's not a political point, but I do think that there is a lack of appreciation by our national legislators sometimes about the impact that passing new legislation has on the wider local government family, and how some of these changes, and yes, they're needed to protect tenants. Absolutely, we should always be looking at ways that we can increase the quality of housing provision, both privately through our private landlords via enforcement, but also through our own housing stock. And I think some work, and maybe it's something we can feed back to through the LGA network and other officer bodies, etc., to make sure that we are making government aware of just how much this is a challenge to us. And I'm not going to look under the table right now. Do we have any other questions on the HRA?
Has anybody got any cheese?
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Hills, please. Thank you. We'll probably find out at some point that this is a new addition on health and safety to get councillors moving and circulating during lengthy meetings. But Councillor Hills, over to you.
Thank you. Yep, as it's been said over the years, there's been lots of changes in housing and the inflation and the value of the pound, etc. But ever since I can remember, we've had working balances of £3 million. Is there anything magical about that figure, or why do we need that all the time? For years and years and years, ever since I've looked at the housing revenue account, we've had exactly £3 million in working balances. Just wondered why that is.
So we do an exercise every year at budget setting, and it's included within the budget setting papers as to how we come up with that £3 million. So we'll look at all the different budget lines. So we'll look at the levels of rent and what would the impact if a certain level percentage didn't repay or don't pay rent, and it covers a whole range of aspects within the HRA. And it has always come out that, just because obviously the number of properties we've got generally, that £3 million is the adequate amount that we need. So there is science behind the number.
There's science behind the number. It sounds more like an arbitrary figure to me, but there you go. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions on the HRA this evening? No. I think in that case, are all members happy to note the report? Yeah, I think I'm not going to have as much success as Councillor Croxton of evicting our friend from the chamber this evening, so I have to grin and bear it. But I'll rattle through the next few items. But as we're all happy to note the report, I'd like to also thank Alex and the wider team for the work that's gone on in this area. That takes us very quickly to item 9, of which there are call-ins, and thankfully there are none tonight. Item 10 of any other business by reason of special circumstance, the chair is of the opinion should be considered as a matter of urgency. The only thing I'd like to note this evening is that preceding this meeting, we had another meeting of the planning review subgroup, which I think was very, very successful. And I'd like to thank Tom for the work that he's doing on that as the director lead. And indeed, we're going to have several meetings to follow, looking to hopefully conclude that review at some point in September. But preceding that, we are now going to extend to wider officer and member feedback via the form of a questionnaire to both the staff of this council and also to us as members. So please look out for that over the next few months. And indeed, from a group level, please try and encourage your members to feedback via that. It will be a very simple, short questionnaire. But I'd like to see 39 responses, because it's really important that we get the views of all members of this council fed back into how we can improve the planning process and the role that we play as being on the front line. Moving to item 11, private items, of which there are none. Turning then to part B, item 12, call-ins again, of which there are none. So at 9:25, I'd like to thank all members and indeed our officers for what I think has been a useful and helpful meeting tonight. I will pause there just before I close and invite Councillor Milner to come up with a solution to our problem that we've.
Are you going to say thank you to our new addition, Councillor Mouse? He's only a little baby, he's a little tiny one, and yes, and I think we should honour him, as a co-opted councillor chair.
I'm afraid I'm not going to second that motion, because I think there'll be fewer councillors and officers present next time if we do. But it's a very kind thought. And at 9:26, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everyone. And double check your bags, please, before you go home.